Good afternoon. And thanks for having me for this session. It's been quite a long time since we did this. So, our clients were asking for a session like this. So, it goes to us, our clients.
Okay. Thank you for also hosting us. So we'll go right into it. First of all, what is neonatal sepsis?
Okay, so when we talk of neonatal sepsis, what we are trying to refer to is an infection in the newborn period. I want to cast our mind back a little. Some maybe 10 years ago, the concept was different. So different because we used to limit ourselves to the first 28 days of life. But science has proven that because we use that concept of the 28 days, most practitioners, most caregivers, and even sometimes the parents took their eye off the care of the children after the 28 days. And so things were happening between, let's say, the 28 days and the 90th day. And so then the concept or the definition was changed to from birth till 90 days. So that anything that you used to do for the child within the first 28 days, you would have to extend the same care, vigilance, and attention up to the third month. And so now the period in which you talk of neonatal sepsis is from birth till the child turns 90 days. It was done so that there was more attention to these vulnerable little ones, because already we used to lose some of them after the 28 days because then the attention weren't the same and people were managing them as if they were infants, or babies that had or needed different kind of attention. They get it.
Yeah.
But if you still have in mind that you have to treat a less than 3-month-old like a day is born, then you like your attention and how you look at things will be different. And hence the definition. And of course, we also go extend to say that we have two types. The two types, and then the same concept. Previously, we used to call early onset as the ones that would happen within the first 7 days. By doing that one, because we intentionally want to ensure that you have a particular attention on these babies, that one also will reduce the first 72 hours. It means that within the first 72 hours, the baby can pick an infection and you determine that as an early onset. Okay. Alright? And then from the 72 hours up to the 90 days, is what will also become a late onset of the neonatal sepsis. That will also give you an idea of what you might be looking at. Is it a case of something, the organisms that are likely to cause the problem, are they those that were found in the community or in the hospital setting, or even before the child was born? And so then you know going forward the kind of treatment that will matter to the child, because it's not the same the one that may have been picked in the hospital setting as against the one that may have been picked in the community.
Okay, so to build on that, I would like to ask, what are the different types in terms of causes? Because we're making mention of the one you pick from the community, the one you can pick from the mother, the one you pick from the hospital. Are there any specific classifications in that sense?
Okay, yes. So yes, you may want to talk about maybe hospital acquired or community acquired. And as I indicated, the treatment might be different, or the kind of organisms that you are looking for might differ. But more importantly, because the early onset ones may have started from the womb of the mother, then you would want to ask questions in relation to how was the antenatal done. During the antenatal period, what are some of the things that may have happened? Did this mother ensure that most of the investigations that are supposed to be done during the antenatal periods were done. For instance, there's an organism we call a cubaceae that tends to harm the newborns, and so those ones are screened at the time of the antenatal period. And so it also addresses the point why mothers will need to go for antenatal, so that some of these screenings can be done, and then some of these organisms, if the mothers have them, can be treated even before they pass on to their children. The same happens with, let's say, during the antenatal period, a mother who may have an infection in the baby or in the urine can be picked up and can be treated even before the child's or the delivery period comes, because some of these things can be picked whilst the babies are passing through the delivery channel. So if the mother is free from these organisms, then the likelihood that the child will pick up the infection is less. Hence the importance of the antenatal period. And so yes, these will be in relation to the ones that are early onset. The late onset ones are mostly, mostly in the home settings, what we touch, how we touch the children, no washing our hands, and then people coming around kissing the children, and then the environment where the child is, what we expose the children to. These are all can be contributing factors for the children to also pick an infection in that late onset period.
Okay. So, but we are going to ask, what are some of the signs and symptoms we see in newborns that can pose us to have an idea that they are having neonatal sepsis?
Great. So, about the signs and symptoms might vary. I mean, it's a whole range, but the commonest that you probably would expect parents to be able to identify would be that your baby that was born was vigorous, then all of a sudden baby starts slowing down in terms of activity level, how vigorous the child was. And that should let you know that, oh, it's not well with my child. Or this same baby that he that too was able to suckle well, it's not suckling well any longer. That should also point you that there could be something happening with my baby. Or the baby can become very warm, in which case, obviously, you should be able to find out, is it normal? Of course, there are some babies that when they are not breastfeeding well, their temperature can go up a little, but it doesn't mean that it should persist. For such babies, once they are breastfed, you should expect the temperature to return to normal. But if your temperature persists, for more than a day, and you think that did not used to be the temperatures of your child, you want to find out whether everything is okay with the child, because that could just be the beginning of neonatal sepsis. The other thing that you also want to find out is some of the children can become yellow. Yellow because once the organism starts causing harm to the babies, they attack what we call the blood of the child. In other words, the red blood cell of the child. And because these red blood cells are being attacked, they start breaking down. And one of the byproducts of the broken down red blood cell is bilirubin. And this is also supposed to be eliminated through the gut. And because there is something that is causing the breakdown, you would expect that the body can cope with elimination. Hence, it stays on the body, and the child can become ill. So, this is also one of the things that you need to look out for when the child becomes, like it's picking an infection. Of course, some of them can start throwing up, vomiting, basically breast milk that baby used to tolerate easily. The baby can start throwing up, it could be an infection. And then for some of them, they can also be passing stools more than usual. Sometimes 6, 7, 8, and more times. It could just be an indication that this your baby might be picking an infection. And then some of them can also have their tummy distended. Okay, there's a condition we call leukocytic enterocolitis. It means that the infection may have been localized at the intestines, and so the digestion is not taking place. And then the likelihood that the child can easily, have the abdomen distended is also there. So these are some of them. Of course, some of them their breathing pattern can change. If you see that all of a sudden the breathing pattern of your child is changed, it's something that you need to look out for. Is it normal? Of course, we know that newborns don't have a regular breathing pattern, but then if the irregularity persists throughout the day, then there is a cause for concern. We want to find out, is this something that we need to be worried about? In all this, we are also trying to say that anytime you see some of these signs and symptoms as parents in your children or in your newborns, you have to start looking for help.
So, as a parent, then if you see some of these things, what's next?
Well, I mean, if you see some of these things, as I said, you will want to look out for the next available clinic or hospital, because then when you go there, obviously the child is going to be examined. When the child is examined, maybe some pre-investigation may be run, and whatever it's found out to be, then the next step will take it. I don't know whether you want me to take us into the specifics when it comes to some of the investigations that you would want to look at.
Well, I know.
Okay. So normally you would want to do what we call a full blood count. What your intention is to find out whether the body soldiers of one's body are alert. The only time your body soldiers will be alert is when something is trying to attack it. Okay. And so if I am being attacked by somebody or a foreign something, I have to be alert. And that's why when we do the full blood count, there is a component of it we call the red blood cell, the white blood cell. This is supposed to serve as defense mechanism. They are supposed to fight against symptoms. And so when you check your full blood count and those white blood cells are up, it means that there is a likelihood that you are picking an infection. Hence, the soldiers are alert. They want to fight back. Do you get it? Then you also will be interested in knowing the type of organism that is causing the problem. So we have two components. One, what we call the granulocytes. Normally, those ones are way up when we are dealing with an organism that is a bacteria. Then the lymphocytes are those that will be up when we are dealing with an organism that is a viral. And so that can also give you an indication. They are also interested in your HP or the hemoglobin level of your child or the newborn. Because as I indicated earlier, when an infection sets in, the organisms mostly tend to attack your red blood cell, hence it will drop your hemoglobin level. So it's also an indication of whether there can be an ongoing infection or not. Then you could also do a lab we call C-reactive protein. That could also give you an indication of, because when it's high, it can give you an indication of the child having an infection. Okay. Of course, for most of the babies, and in a bit more advanced settings, we can do a culture of the blood. Your target here is to want to isolate the possible organism that is causing the problem to the newborn. And it's something that's supposed to be routine, but I know some facilities do not have it. But that lab in itself has its setbacks to the extent that it could well be that the child is having an infection, but you may not isolate an organism. Do you get it? And so for some people, they may want to depend solely on that. If you depend solely on that, you might get it wrong. But it could also well be that the child is not having an infection, and that is why you didn't isolate the organism. And so if you went ahead and treated, you could also be going overboard. So sometimes you would have to go back to your clinical judgment, the client in front of you, or the baby in front of you. What are the signs and symptoms that you are isolating or you are eliciting? What are you seeing? And so we can't solely depend on laboratory findings. They are supposed to be complementary when it comes to the care of the newborn. And very much so when, for instance, in the case of the blood cultures, you have to wait not less than 72 hours before you may get a result.
Yeah.
And so for newborns, because they are vulnerable, their immune system is down, and you have to always be proactive in their management. You want to ensure that even as you are waiting for some results, you should have thought of the possible organism that might be causing a problem and initiate your treatment. Do you get it?
Yeah.
And so those are some of the things that the investigation that we do to want to isolate or find out whether we have neonatal sepsis in our hands or not. But of course, depending on the other signs and symptoms that the child may come with, there are several other investigations that you can look at. So for instance, if your suspicion is that maybe your newborn is convulsing, convulsing can be probably as a result of an infection that has progressed to the brain, what we call a meningitis. But it could also well be because maybe the sugar level of the baby may have dropped below what's acceptable, the condition we call hypoglycemia. That could also be as a result of the child having an infection, because once again the bacteria will also go in for the glucose of the children and reduce it. And so that's also an indication that the child can convert, because if your sugar levels, even as adults, when you are very, very hungry, you sometimes you feel disease, isn't it? And so for the newborns, the way to express you to let you know that their sugars have dropped could be a form of an infection, or they're slowing down in terms of how big growth they are. So that can be another thing that you look at for. But of course, if it's meningitis, then there is a fluid at the back of the newborns, or the lumbar puncture that we do, with the intention of also isolating a possible organism that can be causing the problem. Okay. Of course, if you also believe that the newborn may have had an infection in the chest, which is also around the neonatal period, then other things may come in. Imaging and X-ray of the chest, for instance, can come in handy to want to pick out to which extent is the what we call it, the infection. Of course, I also have to mention that we have something we call congenital pneumonia. It means that the child may have picked the infection in the womb, or certain circumstances surrounding the delivery may have led to the child picking an infection that the focus was in the chest or in the lungs. So that is also possible in what we are talking about.
Okay, so I wanted to ask, what are some of the treatments for situations like this, and also after treatment, what can we advise our mothers to do so as to not expose their babies to any sepsis?
Okay, so the treatment options basically depends on, as I said, the clinical judgment, and then to some extent what your laboratory findings may have picked, i.e., maybe you did a urine culture or blood culture or a lumbar puncture, whichever organism that's isolated, you could go ahead and use the antibiotics that may be hitting those organisms, because when we do the cultures come with, or the results come with the possible treatment guidelines that can help hit that organism. But it is not always the case that you have that luxury. And as I said, for children, for the newborns, you can't have the luxury waiting on some of those results. So you go ahead, because in one's practice, in the location that one finds himself, there are always prevailing organisms that cause harm to the newborns. So, for instance, if you take, let's say, a NICU setting or a hospital setting like the Chatsworth Hospital, Kodebu, Confanoche, Leicester, just name it, whichever hospital that you find yourself, there could be a prevailing organism that may be causing the infections. And that's why it's imperative that once in a while, some of those settings do their what we call they screen for some possible causes. So you take swabs of the hospital setting to find out the organisms that you are likely going to pick. Then you would depend on those things to think that okay, these are in our environment the possible organisms. So these drugs that we are going to choose are likely going to hit them. And so that is what is mostly done, and not necessarily wait for the cultures alone. Of course, sometimes when you do, if you have your doubts as to whether the child has an infection or when we say the child has a risk of taking infection, you can run some of these cultures, and then you may have started your medication, but if you get to the point that you did not isolate anything, then you might be justified to want to hold on with the treatment. Why? Because you did not think clinically that the child had an infection. You just thought that probably because of some circumstances around the delivery, or maybe where the child may have been delivered at, for instance, in the taxi, or you get it, then you made your suspicion was that okay, this child is likely going to pick an infection, not necessarily because the child has come with clear signs and symptoms of an infection. And so that is another way of managing the at-risk of sepsis ones. But when we talk of antibiotics wise, it is purely dependent on the environment and then what you may have, cultured around in your environment, and then the antibiotics that works for you. And that is why there are various. I mean, if you see, let's say, 3 pediatricians, they may give you 3 different, array of antibiotics that will work for them, and they mostly do work because it is, as I said, environment related, setting related. I cannot necessarily fault, let's say, somebody who is treating sepsis in Kolebu differently from how he or she will do so in, let's say, elsewhere, because you don't know the prevailing organisms in Kolebu, so you can't judge, or you can't use that as it were. You can't say that necessarily whatever is done in Kolebu should be done across the world or across other parts of the country, because the prevailing organisms can be different.
And what are some of the things mothers can do at home to not expose their babies to having inconsistent?
Well, to start with, as I mentioned, we think that any mother or any potential mother should be interested in the antenatal care, because that's where it all starts from. Regular antenatal visits can go a long way to avoid some of these things, especially the early onset ones in the newborns. Why? Because, as we said, some treatments or some investigations that may have been done for you can easily pick some of the things that are likely going to harm the newborn. So then when they are picked, then you are treated, then you will not pass on to the child. That is one. 2, we believe that nutrition is fundamental, because for us to be nourished or well nourished, it comes from what we eat. The same with a pregnant woman. Your nutrition is key, because then that can lead to the possible outcome of the pregnancy. So if you are eating well during the pregnancy, because you have somebody that is dependent, that's the baby will also be well nourished. It means the baby's weight gain will be appropriate. You also recognize that children that are born lower than their normal birth weights are also very much at risk of picking infections, because then it means that their immune system is even more compromised than the ordinary newborn. And so it's important that during the pregnancy period, we want to ensure that we do the right things. We keep our hygienic state right. We feed well. We rest well, so that a good pregnancy, an appropriate weight gain during pregnancy, and a baby come out of weight 2.5 and above is not likely to pick an infection against a baby that is born below the 2.5 weight. And so it starts from that point where you would want to ensure that you go for antenatals. And of course, once they come out, we expect that anybody that would come close to the child, especially in the home setting, would be washing their hands. We ensure wherever we normally keep the baby is clean enough. There aren't, dirt and things that will kindly pass on infection to the children. And of course, we also want to avoid people picking the very vulnerable, the less than 90 days, and be kissing them and cuddling them in a way that is inappropriate. As much as possible, we want fewer hands to get in touch with the newborns. But one of the trends that we have seen in our setting is that most of the babies, unfortunately, pick the infections during the naming period, the naming ceremony. Yes, and so we try to let parents know that yes, it's good that we name them in the presence of the lovely one, but people who can come in contact with the newborn should be minimized as much as possible. And also in this period of COVID, so that we don't compromise the children.
Dr. B, thank you very much. It was a very informative session. I hope you enjoyed the session with 101 with Dr. B. We'll come your way again with another video. So make sure you subscribe to our channel, like and share our videos. See you next time.